Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Ayin Ches Amud Aleph at the very top. The previous Amud devoted its attention to the Shita of Rabbi Yehoshua to determine whether he fits into the Mishnah or not. Our Mishnah states that there are 5 different Korbanos Tzibur that are Doiche Es HaTuma. Now the Gemara focuses its attention on the Shita of Rabbi Yossi, asking the same question. Name of Masnisin, the Loi Rabbi Yossi. Let us suggest that our Mishnah is not authored by the Shita of Rabbi Yossi. The Tanya of Rabbi Eliezer Oimer, Hatzit Meratza Al Achilos. The Brisa states by saying, Rabbi Eliezer holds that the tzitz of the Kohen Gadol is Meratze on the Achilos, meaning to say that the avodah is still a valid avodah, even if those things that should be consumed are tamei. Whereas Rabbi Yossi Oimer ein atzitz meratz al achilos, it's not going to meratz on achilos. Kosal kedayte medekam Rabbi Yossi ein atzitz meratz al achilos. Ke Rabbi Yoshua svirulei de Omar bo'inen tarti, that he's of the same shita of Rabbi Yehoshua that requires both dam and bosar. Nei mahashtem asnisin loy ke Rabbi Yossi, whereby it must be that the Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yossi, because since the Mishnah states that the carbon is doiche es hatuma, and the assumption over here is aleph, that the dechia is dechuya, meaning to say that it's the fact that it's doiche es hatuma, it's only dechuya and not hutra, whereby it needs the tzitz to be meratze for it. And since Rabbi Yossi is the shita that it's not meratze ala chilois, then you'll end up having basar. You'll have having no basar with dam, and therefore, since he holds you need basar for the dam, in order for the dam to be nizrak on the mizbech and be a valid carbon, you also have to have basar. Just as Rabbi Yehoshua said, you need tarti. And without basar, then you don't have the zvikas hadam either. So it must be that our Mishnah does not follow the shita of Rabbi Yossi. The Gemara says, Loi, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Eliezer, Svirle. Really, Rabbi Yossi does hold like Rabbi Eliezer. Dam afa pisha ein basar. He does not require the basar to have dam. And therefore, it's going to be a valid way of then bringing the carbon. The carbon will be accepted as being doiche es hatuma, even though you don't have the basar. Ihochi asked the Gemara, if he holds that indeed that you do not need the basar in order to have the dam, then ask the Gemara, Lamai hilchasa ein atzitz meratz al achilos, then what difference does it make that he holds that the tzitz is not meratz an achilos? In other words, whereby then is the machlokes between him and Rabbi Eliezer? The Gemara says, Rabbi Eliezer da'omar hatzitz meratze. Rabbi Eliezer, who does say that tzitz meratze, kivan da'omar dam afavish ein basar hatzitz meratze al achilos l'may hilchasa. The same question will be on Rabbi Eliezer. So it will come out that what is going to be the difference according to either one of them? If indeed you don't anyways need the basar to then affect the carbon and allow the dam to be nizrak on the mizbeach, making it a valid carbon. Says the Gemara, Ella lemikvoi bepigul ulapuke mide meila kamifli. They're arguing about the following. Do we say that the carbon is enough tahor in that it makes it so that there'll be a effective pigul? Pigul means that a person who's bringing the carbon has in mind to eat that carbon after its designated time. Now, in order to be chayiv pigul, a chiyuv of kares, it has to be that the rest of the carbon is valid. But if the rest of the carbon has a psul, for example, it's tamei, then it won't be chayiv pigul, won't be chayiv kares. So therefore, the Gemara is suggesting that this is a machlokes. In addition to that, when a carbon of kodshe kadoshim is nizrak, the dam is nizrak on the mizbeach, then it becomes then in the reshus of the kohanim, and therefore is no longer kodshe shamayim in the sense that one be chayiv mi'ila. So on that, the Gemara is suggesting is the machlokes. Rabbi Eliezer sovar meratze tzitz ilave umashvle kitor. Rabbi Eliezer holds that it has a din of tahor. Not that the meat is tahor, they can consume the meat. No, but it has a din of tahor in that the korban is enough tahor that the fact that there'll be pigul, there will be a chiyuv of kares, and the fact that it now was a valid zrikas hadam, whereby there won't be me'ilah. The kavale pigul b'mapik le midi me'ilah. Rabbi Yosi sovar, he's choylek. Lo yirot maratze tzit ilave v'lo mashve le betor. V'lo kavale b'pigul v'lo mapik le midi me'ilah. Whereas Rabbi Yosi is choylek and says it doesn't have the din of a tohor, whereby he will not be chayiv the pigul, and he will also then still be considered to be chayiv in me'ilah if he were then to misuse that type of consecrated korban. Maskif lo Rav Mari. Rav Mari now asks, Nihi namid Rabbi Yosi Sovak Rabbi Eliezer. Granted that we want to suggest now that Rabbi Yosi holds like Rabbi Eliezer, that indeed the tzitzim meratzan achilois. So that's bishlema zvachim ikadam. That would be very well when it comes to zvachim, a korban where there is dam, then is zikas adam on the mizbeach. So therefore you have the tzitz miratze for that dam, even if it's not miratze, and therefore it's going to be valid. Oimer nami ikakamit, and you have the oimer which is then put onto the mizbeach. The oimer is only going to be a koimet of that oimer that's going on the mizbeach, but the rest will then ultimately be used. It's supposed to be eaten by the kohanim. Lechem haponim nami ika bazichin. Lechem haponim, you also have the tzitz meratze because of the bazichin, the spoonful of levoina that is put on the mizbeach, allowing then the kohanim to take the previous week's lechem haponim and consume it. Ella asked the Gemara, shtei alechem, my ika lemim. What are you going to say about that which is listed in the Mishnah as shtei alechem? The shtei alechem, we're talking about 2 loaves of bread of chitim that are waved. They're not put on the mizbeh, they're waved, and then ultimately they're eaten by the kohanim. So if that's the case, ask the Gemara, here you have nothing to suggest that the tzitz will be meratze for. The whole thing is being consumed. It's all the bread. If you're going to say no, there are 2 kavasim that are shlomim that are brought. Once those shlomim are shechted and then ultimately we're zorig the dam, that's when the kohanim can eat the shtei halechem. So therefore, we found what the tzitz is meratze for these 2 shalmei kavasim. Gemara says, if that's the case, hainu shalmei tzibur. Those are then shalmei tzibur, im kain havuluhu arba v'anan chamisha tnan. But our Mishnah lists 5 different things that the korban tzibur is doiche es atuma, and it lists of the 5 shalmei tzibur. Now, if you're going to tell me that it's the shlomim, the shalmei tzibur of the leche of the shtei alechem, that's already listed in the Mishnah, whereby we don't have 4 and our Mishnah lists 5, which indicates that our Mishnah is talking about simply the shtei alechem alone, without the shtei kavasim. So, which case, what is the tzitz coming to meratze for? It's not able to meratze for that. Ella, says the Gemara, kesova Rabbi Yosi tuma hutra betzibur. Rather, Rabbi Yosi holds tuma is not duchuya, but it's hutra letzibur, whereby you do not need the tzitz to meratze. Ask the Gemara, if that's so, v'hateinach echad ze ve'echad ze mazin alov kol shiva mikol chato shahayusham. Div Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says both this one and that one, both the Kohen Gadol before the week before the Yom Kippurim, we separate the Kohen Gadol 1 week before, 7 days before the Yom Kippurim, and we put him in the Lishkas Hapal Hedron, and he does certain avodos and gets used to the avodos hayoim. We also separate the Kohen who's going to then burn the Efer Para of the Para Aduma also 7 days before. So according to the sheet of Rabbi Meir, they Michumra, we give them the sprinkling of the Para Aduma all 7 days that they are separated, because maybe they came in contact with a mace 3 days before, and this is the first day is the 3rd day, or the 2nd day is the 3rd day, and so on. So therefore, every day, according to Rabbi Meir, we sprinkle the paraduma, the ephah paraduma, on these kohanim. Rabbi Yossi Omer, ein mazin alov ela shlishi v'shvi b'vad. Whereas Rabbi Yossi says we are machmir in order to then try to make sure that there's no such psul, no such tuma on the kohanim, but we only require it to be the third and the seventh day. Ask the Gemara, if you're going to say that Rabbi Yossi's hutra, that the tuma is hutra b'tzibur, well, when it comes to the kohen gadol doing the avodah of the Yom Kippurim, that's considered to be a korban tzibur. And ask the Gemara, then lama li hazah klal? Why does he need hazah? Why are we going to then be concerned? Maybe he came in contact with a dead body, and therefore the third and the seventh day we have to then sprinkle with efer para. If you hold that the tuma is hutra b'tzibur, there's no such thing for such a reason for make a sprinkling. Why should we be choishes such a thing? We can go and then do the avodah anyways. Ella mechavarta maslisin glo Rabbi Yossi. Rather, it's clear that our Mishnah does not fit with the shita of Rabbi Yossi. Now the Gemara goes back to another statement that Rabbi Yossi made that was quoted earlier, and now will be requoted over here in the following brisa. Omar le Rav Papa li Abaye. Rav Papa says to Abaye, Rabbi Yossi shtara mezake lebeit trehu. Rabbi Yossi is going to have a shtar that is going to then be mezake two parties that are saying opposite things. In other words, there are two contradictory shitos. And Rabbi Yossi seems to ascribe to both of them. How does that work out? As follows. Titania. Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says the following. Roye ani as divrei Rabbi Eliezer b'zvachim. V'divrei Rabbi Yoshua b'zvachim. I roye the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer in Zvachim and the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua in Zvachim. V'divrei Rabbi Eliezer ben Menachos. V'divrei Rabbi Yoshua ben Menachos. And I also seem to ascribe to both opinions of Menachos. Rabbi Yeshua's opinion, Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. What are those opinions? Says the Brisa. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer b'zvachim shahaya omer dam afal pi she'ein basar. I can have the dam even if there's no basar. The Rabbi Yeshua b'zvachim shahaya omer im ein dam ein basar. Im ein basar ein dam. So here we see a clear-cut contradiction, because over here, in the words of Rabbi Yeshua, he does require dam and does require the basar. Without one, you don't have the other. Div Rabbi Eliezer b'Menacha shahaya omer kaimetz afal pi she'ein sham shirayim. V'div Rabbi Yeshua b'Menacha shahaya omer im ein sham shirayim ein kaimetz im ein kaimetz ein shirayim. And again, there's an explicit contradiction, because here Rabbi Yossi says that he goes with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who says I can have kaimetz even if there's no shirayim. Whereas Rabbi Yeshua, and he says I also describe the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua, he says I do need both. If I don't have one, then I don't have the other. Omar le. So now Abaye answers Rabbi Papa. Mistabra ka'omar. What Rabbi Yossi was saying is saying that it's mistaber to explain their machlokes in zvachim. Similarly, they can say have the same machlokes in menachos. In other words, he wasn't saying I ascribe like each opinion, but rather it is mistaber to say their machlokes. Over here, Menachos is same too in Zvachim, and the Machos over here in Zvachim, so too is in Menachos. As follows: Kikai bezvachim Omar. When they were learning Zvachim, Mistabra Omar, he said Mistabra ki hechde pli bezvachim pli ma'amin Menachos. The same way that they are arguing in Zvachim, it's Mistabra. They're also arguing in Menachos. Kai b'Menachos Omar. When they were learning Menachos, he said. Mistabra ki hechide pligi b'menachos pligi nami b'zvachim. The same way that they're arguing over here in menachos, it's mistabra to say they're also arguing in zvachim. Omar le, the Gemara challenges this explanation of Abaye. Hateinach ki koy b'zvachim. Omar mistabra ki hechide pligi b'zvachim pligi nami b'menachos. It's very well. It would then make sense to say that when they were learning zvachim, that he was saying that it's mistaber that the same machlokes that exists over here between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua in Zvachim also exists in Menachos. Why? Because the Ika Kroi ki kesivi b'Zvachim kesivi. Because the psukim that they are arguing about in the pasuk, it states korbanos. So I said korban oila, korban shlomim, and therefore, then he says, where it's explicit as a machlokes, it's also mistaber to say they're also arguing menachos. Ella asked the Gemara, Ki koi b'menachos v'amar mistabra ki heichi de plig menachos plig nam mizvachim v'ikar kroi b'zvachim hodich sivi. But when they're holding in menachos, that's what they're learning. It's not mistaber to say that they're also arguing in zvachim. That's where the psukim are. That's where the source of the machlokes is in zvachim. So therefore, it doesn't make sense what Abaye is suggesting. Ella loikasha says Rav Papa, it's not difficult. Roya ani as divrei Rabbi Eliezer minitma. He explains Rabbi Yossi is saying that I hold of Rabbi Eliezer in regards to nitma when the basa became tamei. V'divrei Rabbi Yoshua be'avud v'saruf. But I hold also Rabbi Yoshua, however, in regards to avud and saruf. Ask the Gemara, what kind of chiluk is this? Benitma, my time, what would be the reason why you hold like Rabbi Eliezer benitma when the meat became tamei? Mishuma must be because the meratze tzitz. Because the tzitz is meratze. If that's the case, then you have to be consistent. Hoshamas leila Rabbi Yossi the Omar ein tzitz meratze ala chilos. But we already heard from the previous brisa that proved that indeed Rabbi Yossi holds that tzitz is not meratze on the achilos. So therefore, it's not mistaber to say this chiluk. The same way that it's not going to then be like Rabbi Eliezer ben Nitma. It can't be like Rabbi Eliezer. The same way it's not like Rabbi Eliezer rather in Ovud and Saruf. It's not like Rabbi Eliezer in Nitma. Ela loikashya, says the Gemara, to explain Rabbi Yossi's words and what seems to be an apparent contradiction, an explicit contradiction. Royani as divrei Rabbi Eliezer b'tzibur. Rabbi Yossi was saying, I hold like Rabbi Eliezer's shita b'tzibur. That means to say that when it comes to nitma, that basar became tamei, when it's the tzibur, I hold like Rabbi Eliezer, that indeed it's doiches atuma. Roni as divrei Rabbi Yehoshua b'yachid. But I hold like Rabbi Yehoshua in regards to avud and nisra and saruf, when it comes to the yachid, the individual carbon, that it's not doiche. Explains the Gemara, b'tzibur my taima. The Gemara wants to know, why in the tzibur are you saying that it is doiche? Mishum, answers the Gemara, the tuma hutra b'tzibur. Because tuma is hutra b'tzibur. And therefore, when it's the tzibur, it's doiche. He goes like Rabbi Eliezer. However, when it's an individual, it's not doiche. Ask the Gemara, Chada, first of all, the Shamis, Rabbi Yossi Domar, Tuma, Dechuya Hu B'tzibur. We quoted the brisa which we proved from that brisa above that Rabbi Yossi holds that Tuma is Dechuya B'tzibur, because we said, why does it require that the Kohen Gadol required the sprinkling, that the sprinkling of the Efer Parah be on the third and the seventh day? If indeed the tuma's hutra b'tzibur, then such a chashash would not be necessary. So therefore, we prove that it's dechuya according to Rabbi Yossi. That's first question. V'oid, and further, I b'tzibur, Rabbi Eliezer machshir v'lo Rabbi Yoshua. Are you going to say if it's b'tzibur, Rabbi Eliezer would machshir, but the Rabbi Yoshua would not? He would choylek on Rabbi Eliezer. So why would that be so? Says the Gemara, Dav Ein Ches Amud Beis on the top. V'ho amris b'tzibur afil Rabbi Yoshua moide. Behold, you already said that when it comes to the tzibur, Rabbi Yeshua is moide. So therefore, that can't be a chiluk. Answers the Gemara, Ela roya as di Rabbi Eliezer b'di eved. V'di Rabbi Yeshua lechatchila. Rather, what Rabbi Yossi was saying is, I hold, like Rabbi Eliezer, b'di eved, that only after the fact, then it's valid. But I hold like Rabbi Yeshua lechatchila. The Eved, Afil Rabbi Yoshua, Nami Moidehu. Ask the Gemara, but even if it's B'diev, Rabbi Yeshua is Moide. Diktani, for it states, as we quoted earlier, Moide Rabbi Yeshua She'im Zorak Hurtza. If B'diev, the dam was already Nizrak, then Rabbi Yoshua is Moide, that it's valid. The Gemara answers, Ha B'tuma, Ha B'ovid V'saruf. That's the chiluk between Tuma and Ovid Saruf. That which he said that it's going to be good b'di'evet, he's talking about Tuma. Kiketani moed Rabbi Yeshua shem zorak hortza benitma. That's when the basar exists, but it becomes tamei. So b'di'evet, according to Rabbi Rabbi Yehoshua, it's going to be valid. Aval be'avud v'saruf loy. But if it's no longer in existence, either it's nevad, it's lost, or the basar was burnt, so Rabbi Yehoshua says that it's not going to be valid even b'di'evet. Ki kama Rabbi Yossi. Now Rabbi Yossi then makes the following pshara, so to speak. He says, Roya ani as div Rabbi Eliezer b'di'evet. I hold like Rabbi Eliezer b'di'evet, where be'avud v'saruf. I hold like Rabbi Eliezer, even though Rabbi Yehoshua is cholik on him, and he says b'di'evet, that's not going to be good. And even though Rabbi Eliezer says even by nitma, I'm going to say that b'di'evet, says Rabbi Yossi, I hold like Rabbi Eliezer be'avud v'saruf. In other words, on that he holds like Rabbi Eliezer, but he holds like Rabbi Yehoshua lichatchila in regards to nitma. So that's the sheet of Rabbi Yossi. When he said both things, he was talking about two different things. On the one hand, he holds like Rabbi Eliezer in regards to avud and saruf. That in regards to b'di'evet, he would hold b'di'evet, and he would go like Rabbi Eliezer, even though Rabbi Eliezer is lichatchila, but he says b'di'evet. And he says, I hold lichatchila by nitma, like Rabbi Yehoshua. And that's the sheet of Rabbi Yossi, and that reconciles what seems to be an open contradiction in his words.